the proprietary brand name owned by Mélenchon and La France Insoumise has networks, but not any democratic policy process, etc., etc., etc. So the PS, the call for snap elections, led the Parti Socialiste to rejoin with its coalition partners, but they rebranded it as the Nouveau Front Populaire. And the reason why they rebranded it as the Nouveau Front Populaire is Le Pen, the Rassemblement National, is the threat of fascism in the same way as there was a threat of fascism in 1936. And we can create a Nouveau Front Populaire to defeat fascism. And then it turned out in the first round result, the Rassemblement National was in the lead, with contrary to Macron's expectations. Macron expected that his ensemble coalition would come second to the Rassemblement National, and that the left would be forced to vote for Macron in the second round, for the Macronists in the second round. And didn't work out that way. The stand-down agreements for the, as it were, Front Républicain, the Republican Front, stand-down agreements wound up being, as often as not, the Macronists were standing down for the Nouveau Front Populaire rather than the Nouveau Front Populaire standing down for the Macronists. So the result then in the Assembly is Nouveau Front Populaire, 188 seats, Ensemble, 161 seats, Rassemblement National and its allies, 142 seats, and the Republicans, Les Républicains, the old Gaullist party, 48 seats, others 38 seats. So it's very clear nobody has a clear majority. The largest minority is the Nouveau Front Populaire. So the Nouveau Front Populaire then say, right, we're the largest minority, therefore we are in principle entitled to nominate the Prime Minister. But who is going to be the Prime Minister from the Nouveau Front Populaire? We can't agree on this because the PS is not willing. The Parti Socialiste has got much stronger. The Parti Socialiste was almost marginalized in the in the mid 2000s after the disaster of the Hollande government. But it's got much stronger. NUPES rehabilitated the Parti Socialiste so that it got a significant increase in the number of delegates, the deputies, and the Euro elections, which were conducted on the basis that the Parti Socialiste was standing against La France Insoumise and its allies, and the PC, the Parti Communiste, was standing separately in the Euro elections. The PS gained again, and then in the Nouveau Front Populaire, the PS has been accorded a very significant number of seats, proportional. It's still a minority relative to the La France Insoumise, but it's each time the PS has strengthened. So can it be personally the PS recommended unacceptable to La France Insoumise? Can it be the person? Can it be Mélenchon? No, this is absolutely out of the question. Can it be La France Insoumise recommended a guy from Réunion who was close to La France Insoumise? No, that's unacceptable to the PS. So we get the common candidate of the Nouveau Front Populaire didn't exist at the time when I wrote this article. A woman called Lucie Caster, who is ex-Parti Socialiste. She's an economist trained at Sciences Po and the London School of Economics. Went on to the École Nationale d'Administration, so she's an anarchist, one of these central French bureaucratic group. Broke with the PS over Hollande's leftism. Yeah? So that in essence, the adoption of Castex as the common candidate, in spite of what some of the British, well, Mullen writes for Counterfire, says Castex is a militant candidate because she ran a campaign for defence of public services as a senior civil servant. Her career is basically as a civil servant. She's now the finance director, currently finance director of the city of Paris, has been finance director of the city of Paris. Meanwhile, Macron has been staving off the necessity of recognising defeat in the parliamentary elections, arguing in the first place for a political truce for the duration of the Olympics. Justify that. And then till the end of August, we don't need to form a government until the end of August, which again we can sort of justify because France goes on holiday in August. And this is not an absolute truth, but we can sort of say rather. Macron is almost certainly still hoping to deploy the anti-Semitism stuff as was the anti-Semitism stuff was deployed to force a split in NUPES in October 2023, to deploy that and get on board the Greens and the Socialist Party together with the Macronists to construct a coalition which will exclude both the Rassemblement on the right and the La France Insoumise on the left. That's one aim. Significant part of the Macronists among Macronist deputies argue, however, right-wing Macronist deputies argue, however, that the right solution is to go into coalition with the Rassemblement National, that by going into coalition with the Rassemblement National, they will be held to the constitutional order, just as element of German conservatives in 1933 argued that bringing the Hitler movement into coalition would hold them to the constitutional order. But I must admit, I do not think that the Rassemblement National is remotely comparable to the Hitler movement in 1933. It's a fascist party, ex-fascist party. It's not even a party which is explicitly Catholic integralist in its constitutional conceptions. It's a nationalist, neoliberal, right-wing party, which has the same character as the Conservative Party, And Conservative Party is the foundation of all these parties of the right. We have to think of the Conservative Party as the party which organised London street demonstrations and attacks on Huguenot churches in the 1680s against Huguenot immigration, and which organised attacks on dissenting meeting houses in 1710 to 1711, which campaigned on the blood libel and against Portuguese Jewish immigration in the 1730s, which campaigned against the naturalisation of Jews in the 1750s, which organised again riots to church and crown rioters to attack dissenting meeting houses in the 1790s, and anti-Irish agitation all through the 19th century, and which is the Conservative Party. It's the Conservative Party rather than anybody else which lies today behind the far-right attacks on mosques and South Asians, if one sort of remember that. So this is to say the Conservative Party is a party of the far right. It's the archetypal party of the far right. It's that model, half politics indoors, half politics out of doors, not the fascist model, which was a model had two elements to it, one of which was organised militias, organised and uniformed militias with at their spinal core veterans organisations of veterans from the First World War. you know. And secondly, demagogy of a radical Keynesianism, radical stimulus policy, closed national economy, aggressive restoration of the position of the nation. In reality, these guys, just like Meloni in Italy, is the prime minister, he's the head of the far-right party. His far-right party is descended in lineal descent from the Italian social movement of the last years of Mussolini and after Mussolini. Nonetheless, the Meloni regime is authoritarian in the same extent and the same degree as recent conservative administrations in Britain, and it's a neoliberal outfit and a Europeanist and Atlanticist outfit. Okay, so where we are then is we're waiting in terms of the state of French politics. Seems reasonably clear that whatever the Rassemblement National was electorally defeated, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they won't form part of the government. It depends on what tactics are adopted by the Macronists, and it depends on whether the Parti Socialiste and Europe Écologie Les Verts betray La France Insoumise and go over to an agreement with the Macronists, and so on. We can't say with certainty. Second point, this sort of coalition of the left, with the Socialist Party, the Communist Party, the Greens, other minor parties, is not a novelty in French politics. It goes back to, as I said, NUPES was the same coalition, which has just been rebranded as the Front Populaire. The Union de la Gauche, the Union of the Left, involving the Socialist Party and the Communist Party and small left radical groups, backed Mitterrand in the 1970s, 1980s. There was a broad front coalition government in 1945-46. The Front Populaire itself running from 1936 to 1938. In the 1920s, the Cartel des Gauches in 1923 to 24 and 1924 to 26, sorry, 1932 to 33. The cartel of the left, of the Socialist Party and the left and the Radical Party without communists at that time. Responses of the British left to this development in France. The Communist Party's Communist Review has got substantial articles on the United Front and on the Popular Front, and reprint of Dimitrov summing up of the discussion to the 7th Congress of the Comintern. The United Front is merely historical argument. The People's Front is John Foster. The argument is same old, same old. Monopoly capitalism. Monopoly capitalism requires us to construct a union of different classes and the alliance of different classes, which can take the form of a People's Front, or perhaps we can call it an anti-monopoly alliance. But nothing new in here. So,
who was that? John Foster.
John Foster of the CBB, Morning Star. Socialist Worker, we've got 3 articles by Charlie Kimber. June the 15th, when this thing was just being launched, Charlie wrote on what are the lessons from the Popular Front against fascism in 1930s France. And we get quotations from Trotsky, and Trotsky was pointing towards the United Front against fascism, the involvement of workers in action against the fascists, focused on mobilization on the streets and at work. he didn't mean blurring the differences between various parties or giving in to the most right-wing forces. We've actually got a quotation from Trotsky, which probably does support the SWP's line in this case. Election agreements, parliamentary compromises concluded between the Revolutionary Party and the Social Democrats. Democracy serve as an example, as a rule, to the advantage of the social democracy. Practical agreements for mass action for purposes of struggle are always useful to the Revolutionary Party. And then we've got a narrative of the history of the Unpopular. And at the end of this, the way was cleared for the Nazi invasion in 1939 and the establishment of the fascist supporting government of Marshal Pétain. Then in the French elections, then in July the 3rd, just the day before the election results came out, Kimber again writes here, French elections, why the new Popular Front standing down candidates won't beat the fascists. So his objection here is not to the NPF as such, but to the fact that the NPF is standing down to the Macronists in the second round. Giving credence to Born Daman and others repeats the ideas that these supposedly centrist figures are a dam against the RN. It is the same terrible strategy that thought Macron would defeat Le Pen. But what's the solution? The left of the anti-racist movement are not weak. On the weekend of 15th, 16th June, around 800,000 took to the streets against the RN. Mobilizing these people and the many more horrified by the recent RN vote is crucial. And then after the election, French fascists lose out in polls, but struggle must continue. And the conclusion again, the Marche des Solidarités, anti-racist people right to say, it's in our neighborhoods, our workplaces, in the streets that we are strongest in our solidarity and in our unity. So it's the usual message of the Socialist Workers' Party, striking street, striking street, striking street is the solution. Plus, however, in a box, what's behind the fascists' rise, the third head is that the left and union leaders did not create an effective united front against fascism when the FN was small, and many also refused to call the FN fascist. But of course, hey, we've just had the riots over here. Has the crush fascism in the egg strategy worked? And the answer, unambiguously clearly, is no. It has been the policy of the British far left since 1974 at the latest, that the policy, so that's 50 years ago, of crush fascism in the egg by United Front for Workers through street strike action, etc., etc., etc. And it has failed unambiguously. John Mullen of Counterfire, the fascists' new Popular Front and the crisis in France in 24th of June. The National Rally has in fact only pretended to change. The option of a government with a fascist core has been normalised. But the Nouveau Front Populaire is a great thing. Only over 10,000 people joined the networks of France Insoumise within a few days. Some people are leafleting for the first time ever. So the mobilisation is true. As we know, says Mullen, elections are not at the centre of the class struggle, but the formation of the New People's Front has allowed a far wider and deeper anti-fascist mobilisation. Now, this stuff must be true, but at the same time, why are we saying elections are not at the centre of the class struggle? It's clear that elections are an important and significant part of the class struggle. And the demand, the Popular Front, is made possible by pressure from below. Last week, when 4 organisations were negotiating for an alliance, hundreds of young people outside the building were chanting, "The youth demands a Popular Front." So he's then written, actually quite recently, 30th of July, on the election, the adoption of Castell, who he thinks is she's a good candidate and she's competent. Ian Birchall of RS21 tells us about the history of the People's Front in France, promotes the activity of the revolutionary left faction of the Socialist Party, which was the Trotskyist entry operation. It's good news, he says, that the nouveau Front Populaire has been formed. This is back in June. It should be said it's not actually a popular front, in the way that term is commonly used on the left. The main components are the Socialists, the Communists, the Greens, and La France Insoumise. Three of these are socialist organisations with roots in the working class. The Greens have no pro-capitalist base, and their ecological demands often point them in an anti-capitalist direction. But this is a point which Trotsky in fact made in the 1930s, both of the French and of the Spanish Popular Front, that the parties which went in with the socialists and communists in the People's Front were not the parties of big capital. Big capital backed the far right. It was the parties of the petty bourgeoisie, the radical anti-clerical wing of the middle classes and peasantry, which went in with the workers' parties. There's a concern about anti-Semitism, says Ian Birchall. The leaders of the four main NFP parties have issued a very firm statement against anti-Semitism. What does that mean in the context of the war in Gaza, with the anti-Semitism smear campaign, but the fact that the PS split from New PES over the alleged anti-Semitism of the failure of La France Insoumise to characterize Hamas as terrorists? The very firm statement against anti-Semitism almost inevitably means a declaration of loyalty to the Atlantic Alliance. Unfortunately, says Comrade Birchall, the NFP has not got total support on the left. There are those who still want to juxtapose their own theoretically correct programme to the actual reality which the NFP represents. Happily, other sections of the far left are taking a more positive attitude. The Nouveau Parti Anticapitaliste, which originated with the Fourth International, has joined the NFP, etc. And finally, Gilbert Ashkar of Anti-Capitalist Resistance, actually writing in Anti-Capitalist rather than and then translated for anti-capitalist resistance, argues something actually quite positive, which is that radical anti-capitalist, but essentially he argues that the LFI should not participate in government. But a radical anti-capitalist and democratic political force should have explained that the implementation of its programme through the existing anti-capitalist and non-democratic institutions requires the support of an absolute majority of the National Assembly, which would itself be the outcome of support by a majority of the population. Thus, the force should have explained that it would refuse to be associated with government in the absence of this condition. He argues that therefore, so this I think is correct point that he's making. It's making yourself a prisoner in the government, which is a problem. But he goes on to argue that it would be more appropriate for the LFI to say that it will not participate in the government in the absence of a clear majority, but that it would support a government formed by the other components of the NFP, rather like support given in Parliament by the Portuguese left bloc in 2015 to the minority socialist government. The problem with this is actually it turns out that external support, and this we can see from the recent experience both of the Portuguese left bloc and actually of the Danish Red-Green Alliance in giving external support to a Socialist Party government in Denmark. In both cases, you don't actually escape being tarred with the brush of the anti-working class activities of the government at hand. So Ash Khan has made a significant step forward relative to standard popular frontism, but not one. Yeah. My second point, the coalition policy wasn't new with the 1936 People's Front. It was already the case that the Baden and Bavaria provincial organizations of the German Social Democratic Party before the war argued for a policy of making coalitions with the liberals in order to achieve limited reform. So this was not a novelty. This was a part of the policy of the right wing of the Second International. Similarly, the possibilist right wing of the French socialist movement in the 1880s, 1890s argued for, though it didn't get much of, coalition operations. And in 1899, Millerand, who was came from that background in the socialist movement, joined a government of Republican defense, just like we're talking about defending the Republic against the fascists. This was defending the Republic against the Catholic and Bonapartist right wing by going into a government together with the radicals. The Mitterrand case of Mitterrand entering into government gave rise to a big debate in the Second International about the legitimacy of joining capitalist governments. As I said, the Cartel de Gauche in France in 1924-26 and 1932-33, the Communist International proposed the United Front, partly in relation to Germany, but also in counterposition to the Cartel de Gauche. No, we don't want an alliance between the Socialist Party and the radicals. We want an alliance of the workers' parties of the socialists and communists as to offer an alternative for France. And the same issue in relation to Germany, in fact, because in the 1920s, the German Socialist Party, the majority Socialist Party, that's the SPD, the Social Democrats, entered into a series of coalition agreements of one sort or another with the Centre Party and other parties. And the idea of a workers' united front of the socialists and the communists was a counterposed to this policy of coalition with the parties at the centre left in Germany. I return to the question of the People's Front and fascism. And in the article, I made the point that France was the second People's Front, the first being the People's Front government in Spain. The People's Front government in Spain almost immediately attacked by a military coup. And after the military coup, the communists joined the government, the socialists joined the government, which was originally a radical government with external support. The CNT Anarchist Trade Union Confederation joins the government. And the upshot of that is that the CNT wind up suppressing their own militia in the name of creating a democratic army, constitutional army. The Spanish were in a pretty desperate situation because, of course, the Franco coup d'etat and then subsequently military civil war was backed by Germany and Italy with military force, and the British government insisted on an embargo preventing the supply of arms to the Republican government. And unlike common embargoes, the British government's embargo preventing the supply of arms to the Republican government was in fact enforced. I came across this by complete accident. There's a case on restitution of funds which arose from an attempt by US communists to raise money to buy arms in Czechoslovakia and ship them to Spain. The British government intercepted the arms and therefore prevented delivery. The question is whether the people who paid for the arms can now get their money back because no delivery has been made on the contract. And we get a litigation which goes to the Court of Appeal with DN Pritt, Communist KC, and a Communist Junior appearing for the claimants who want their money back. And A.T. Denning, later Lord Denning, Master of the Rolls, that fine young fascist Harry Lawton, appearing for the British government to argue they can't get it back. So, nonetheless, the upshot of this is that the potential military effectiveness in the Spanish Civil War, attempting to get Western backing, British and French backing, and although the older textbooks will tell you that Britain and France agreed on the embargo against supplying arms to the Republic, it turns out that in fact Britain said that if the French allowed the supply of arms to the Republic, Britain would stop supporting France against Germany. So that it's British policy to starve the Republic. In that situation, the Republic could have won by irregular warfare, by offering the colonies independence and thereby forcing the Frankists to send troops back to the colonies to hold on to them if they wanted to, by adopting a radical land reform policy and by trying to operate a guerrilla operation as well. But the way in which they in fact operated was to try and run regular warfare, and unsurprisingly they lost. In France, the Front Populaire is initially, it's not that the Front Populaire in itself is successful, but that it kicks off an enormous strike wave in May, June 1936, involving massive occupations of the factories. And Léon Blum, the business guy, said to Léon Blum that he saved French capitalism by entering into the Matignon agreements, which gave French trade unionists legal right to organize, the right to strike, right to holidays for the first time. And that then demobilized strike action. And then after that, actually, whether the presence or absence of the strike action would have caused this, but the Front Populaire never had a majority in the upper house. There was a flight of capital. This is the standard response of capitalists. So Hollande, very, very mild, François Hollande's proposals, very, very mild reform proposals, leads to an enormous flight of capital out of France, and he has to give way. Mitterrand, there was a flight of capital out of France, and he has to give way. The 1974 Labour government, there was a flight of capital out of Britain, and it became necessary to submit to the International Monetary Fund and impose cuts and so on and so forth. The Senate blocked any effort to impose foreign exchange controls, any control on the movement of capital. And the upshot of that is that Léon Blum, the Prime Minister, gets dumped. We get Radical Party Prime Minister rather than Socialist Party Prime Minister, and gradual movement to the right, and the French Communist Party gets denounced as warmongers for the fact that they oppose the Munich Agreement, 1938, and the Communist Party having been denounced as warmongers, the finance minister is replaced by a hardline neoliberal. There are mass sackings after November 1938. 1940, the French generals, by and large, pursue a policy of that they're more concerned with the defeat of the left and the radicals than they are with the defeat of Hitler. Certainly aren't willing to carry on fighting under circumstances where the German army had not, in fact, advanced very much further forward than it had in August 1914, at the time of the Battle of Marne in autumn 1914. So that in both cases, the Popular Front leads to the victory of fascism. It doesn't lead to the victory of fascism immediately. It has an appearance. The Frente Popular in Spain appears to stop the fascists winning the elections. It does stop the fascists winning the elections, but it doesn't stop the Popular Front in France. It gives rise to an episode of enormous gains, but also then after that to failure, demoralization as a result of inflation eating away the gains and then the revenge of capital from the scare which they got. And we can see the same thing, famous examples, Chile, 1973, General Pinochet was supposed to be the democratic general, the general who was loyal to the constitution, as opposed to those generals who have been openly calling for a coup. But it was Pinochet who made the coup. In Argentina, the Trotskyist, Moreno Trotskyist, Partido Socialista de los Trabajadores, the Socialist Workers' Party, which was a strong, as Trotskyist organizations go, with about 10,000 members, was a strong organization, entered into a pact for the defense of the republic against the threat of military coup. Not big demonstrations, but there was a military coup nonetheless, and the PST, along with everybody else, was subject to a dirty war for years afterwards. I have referred elsewhere, there are the communist parties of the Middle East have been totally unable to pursue a clear and consistent policy because of the Popular Front policy, leading them either to ally with people who represent themselves as Democrats or to ally with people who represent themselves as nationalists. And the result is that the Communist Party doesn't appear as offering an alternative. So the people who appear as offering an alternative to the way in which things currently operate is the Islamists. Nonetheless, the People's Front has been the dominant view of the left, and that the fact that it's still the dominant view of the left, reflected in the Communist Review stuff, and also reflected in the influence of the People's Front idea on the Trotskyists, who are supposedly the great opponents of the People's Front. And the question why is because in 1941, the effect of the fall of France and the fall of Norway in 1940 is that the British Empire is under collapse. The strategic position of the British Empire, which was to hold Europe in subordination through its division, and thereby free the hands of the British for action throughout the world. The strategic position of the British Empire collapses. The British agree in spring-summer 1940, formally agreed to hand over to the United States, that the US will take over the world leadership role. But at the same time, the effect of the fall of France and Norway and Netherlands, Belgium, and so on, is that these countries are faced, in fact, with unified Europe under German leadership. And unified Europe under German leadership is a real hypothetical alternative world hegemon compared to the United States. And in that situation, when Germany invades Russia in August 1941, the British, and then after the British, the Americans, enter into a World Popular Front between the USSR and the quote Western democracies. And this global popular front between the USSR and the Western democracies is the alliance which wins the Second World War, is the foundation of the United Nations. In the name of it, there are popular front governments all across Europe in the aftermath of the Second World War. And in the West, in Western and Central Europe, these lead to, well, Western Europe, I should say, these lead to the restoration of capitalism and then the usual routine that it's necessary to hand over. You get the Popular Front to stabilise the position, coalition to state government to stabilise the position, and then you hand over to the right. However, the United States in 1947 demands the agreement that Stalin had made was that there would be capitalist countries in Eastern Europe, but that they would be friendly neutrals towards the USSR, and they would allow the communists and so on and so forth. But there would not be a restoration of the cordon sanitaire of right-wing governments in Eastern Europe, which had been in the Second World War. But the United States was not willing to be bound by its agreements. And in 1947 demands US naval access to the Danube, which would in practice amount to the recreation of the cordon sanitaire. There's a push again to get the communists out of the coalition governments and turn them into. And in that context, Stalin, or the Soviet administration in general, says, okay, the CPs can now go ahead and take power in Eastern Europe in the countries of the cordon sanitaire. And at the same time, the Chinese CP wins the civil war in China. And we get in 1949 the Chinese People's Republic created. We also get Sovietization, part of the same policy, Sovietization in the name of a People's Front government in Korea, North Korea, in Soviet-occupied North Korea, in North Vietnam. So the People's Front now looks like a road to socialism. And it goes on looking like a road to socialism because the Cuban Revolution carried out initially in the name of a bourgeois party, the July 26th movement, and then in the name of a, quote, integrated revolutionary organization. The reality is the July 26th movement, small radical group which disposed of quite negative, they had 200 men under arms in total when they took Havana. And the reason they were able to take Havana with 200 men under arms was that the much bigger Popular Socialist Party, the Chinese Communist Party, the Cuban Communist Party, had organized a mass general strike in response to the terrorist operations of the Batista regime. And the Batista regime had just collapsed. The soldiers still run away. But similarly, the People's Front is the banner under which the People's Democratic Republic of Yemen appears to defeat the English in 1967. Yeah. We get full Sovietization in a number of countries outside of Western Europe, Eastern Europe, sorry, in the name of the banner of the People's Front. The problem with this, as the People's Front is the road to socialism, we can look at it two ways. One of which, this Soviet regime is not socialist, and this is my starting point. The Soviet regime is not socialism, but on the hypothesis, Soviet regime was to be considered as, in some sense, post-capitalist, or even partially, in some sense, post-capitalist, which we perhaps could say. How did it come to be the case that People's Fronts could take power? The answer is, in reality, that the bourgeois army and police force had already been smashed. The reality is that the armed forces of the People's Front governments in Eastern Europe were the Red Army. and the local allies of the Red Army is the destruction of the state, which the previous destruction of the state, which allows the form of the People's Front nonetheless not to be an obstacle to further Sovietization. That wouldn't be enough on its own. I said that the Front Populaire in France is defeated as much by flight of capital as by anything else. The People's Front governments in Eastern Europe can't be defeated by flight of capital, and the reason why they can't be defeated by flight of capital is what later is called COMECON, Council for Mutual Economic Assistance. That is to say that they become economically integrated with the Soviet Union. It's because the Soviet Union, in fact, Cuba for that matter, the Castro regime is able to survive because and only because of enormous Soviet economic subsidy to it. So you need the two elements in that sense. First, the actual smashing and destruction of the state before you get to the question of the People's Front in the coast. It's not that the People's Front is a road to smashing the state. It isn't. Why isn't it? The answer is, in fact, not because you're allying with the party of the big bourgeoisie. As I said, the French and Spanish People's Fronts are not parties, alliances of the left with the workers' parties, with the parties of the bourgeoisie. The point is that the inclusion of petty bourgeois parties in the alliance is a signal to the capitalist state that you will work within the framework of capitalist constitutionalism. And that signal to the state is that you will work within the framework of capitalist constitutionalism is a signal to the state that you will leave the armed forces intact. And that signal to the state that you will leave the armed forces intact. In the Spanish Popular Front, the liquidation of the militias of the CNT and the PUM in Catalonia, that's a signal to British imperialism and to that you will not go beyond the boundaries of capitalist constitutionalism. In France, similarly, the participation of the radicals, okay, they're a big party, but nonetheless, the essence of the matter is a signal that we will leave the capitalist constitution intact. And leaving the capitalist constitution intact means leaving intact the right of the bourgeoisie to make flight of capital, the absence of exchange controls, leaving intact the army high command, which in 1940 betrays the Republic and creates the regime of occupied France and Vichy. The problem which goes along with that is we also have popular frontism. We don't have to be large enough to create popular frontism. We don't have to be large enough to create a real contender for government. We can nonetheless commit to what I've called here and elsewhere unpopular fronts. And these unpopular fronts are small groups where, in order to demonstrate our loyalty to the capitalist state order, we put some celeb or some utterly trivial bourgeois party, the Greens, into the coalition. The Red Dean of Canterbury, Lady Dock, and so on. This was the CPGB of the 1930s, created a series of these attempted unpopular fronts. Okay, the CPGB, the old under CPB, the line of the People's Front has led them to constantly argue that Labour should enter into electoral coalition with the Lib Dems, which, given that the Lib Dems, it's odd that they should not have abandoned that one after the Lib Dems chose, when they had the choice, to go into coalition with the Tories. But the same is true, of course, of the bloody Greens. And the Oxfordshire, where I live, was for quite some years governed by a Conservative Green, Oxfordshire County Council, governed by a Conservative Green coalition. So what you're doing is you're symbolising you're actually symbolizing loyalty to the Constitution by insisting on this. And the same is true of the anti-Nazi League, Socialist Workers' Parties, People's Front opposition to the National Front. It was Popular Front is not because there was any big bourgeois parties involved in it. It was Popular Front is because it adopted symbolizing mechanisms which symbolized loyalty to Britain and the British Constitution. And the effect of it is to popularize the idea that you can't have broad unity unless it involves some celeb, unless it involves some petty, some small petty bourgeois party or something like that, unless it involves the mosque, etc., etc., etc. Okay, I'm running out of time. My final point, as I said, was about the Trotskyists. When the People's Front came along, the Trotskyist opposition had been built up on a small scale, and it was on a small scale before 1935, around opposition to the third period, that is to say, the period of which the Comintern took the view that social democracy is the same thing as fascism, social fascism, alongside fascism. And it'd be built up on the argument for the United Front. So now in 1934-35, the Comintern abruptly reverses itself. It does so because although the social fascism line was animated by the German social democracy denouncing the Treaty of Rapallo, in which the secret clauses of the Treaty of Rapallo, in which the USSR and the Soviet regime, and the German government engaged in military collaboration to enable the Germans to partially rearm in violation of the Versailles Treaty. Okay, the German social democracy denounced the secret clauses of the Rapallo Treaty, probably in coordination with the British, at a time when the British and French were threatening Soviet Russia with war. And that leads to the Comintern, under the leadership of Bukharin, in fact, before he fell, adopting the position that the social democracy was, that you had to fight against the social democracy as well as against the fascism. And this line of so Trotsky's were built up on the basis of the fighting for the policy of the United Front. Now in 1934, it turns out the Hitler regime will not, as the Soviet regime had expected, restore the Rapallo policy, which was the policy of the German nationalists, right? But is actually going to pursue the policy which Hitler had said he would do in opposition, of making Lebensraum for the German people by expansion eastwards. Now, the Comintern is desperate for allies with, quote, Western democracy. And we get the radical turn to the People's Front, and it's supported, supported by the guys who've been arguing for the United Front. In the Trotskyist movement, there's an opposition develops. Trotsky's line in relation to this is, nonetheless, we have to break with the alliances with the bourgeoisie and have the United Front, not the People's Front. And in order to pursue that line in France, it seemed to be that there was a left opposition in the Parti Socialiste, which was opposed to entering into alliance with the radicals. And the lefts in the Parti Socialiste invited the Trotskyists to enter to reinforce this opposition to the communist argument for an alliance between the PS and the radicals, CP, PS and the radicals. So this is, quote, the French turn, which the Trotskyists then, and I must admit, I think this is a terrible vice of Trotskyism. You take a tactical turn in one country and then you apply it in every country. So the French turn then, there is an opposition to the French turn, but this opposition to the French turn expresses itself as it's unprincipled to enter the Socialist Party. But it is actually a line of argument which says it is better for us to support critically the People's Front movements. And so we have Andre Nin in Spain enters into a party alliance with Joaquim Maurín in the Partido Obrero Unificación Marxista, the Workers' Party of Marxist Unification, which unifies the left opponents of the Comintern with the right opponents of the Comintern in a non-Stalinist party. The Archives of Marxist group in Greece, which had been part of the Trotskyist movement, takes the same line. Trotsky is being sectarian towards the communist parties in taking this turn towards the socialist parties. The Revolutionary Socialist Workers' Party of the Netherlands, ex-Nederland, this fusion of two groups, I can't remember the name of the two groups, the OSP and the RSP, takes the same line. Georges Verreken, who's the leader of a left tendency in Belgium, takes the same line. Hugo Oehler in the United States, we've got people who don't think they're descendants of Hugo Oehler, but are in fact descendants of Hugo Oehler, Spartacists. It's unprincipled to enter into the Socialist Party because the Socialist Party is led by right-wingers. But in reality, Hugo Oehler, in his correspondence, was a supporter of the POUM against Trotsky. The Molinier-Frank tendency of Raymond Molinier and Pierre Frank in France, their organization, their newspaper called La Commune. We need to set up a broad left party which will give left support to the project of the People's Front. Molinier and Frank were expelled from the Fourth International over this stuff, or rather over a revived version of it. Parti Socialiste des Ouvriers Paysans with Marcel Pivert. But then, because Pierre Frank was incorporated in the central leadership of the post-war Fourth International, the story was suppressed, and instead the politics was suppressed, and instead we get the story they were expelled for Raymond Molinier's dodgy dealings and pimping, alleged. This is a fake story which conceals the actual political difference. So my point is that the Trotskyist movement, through this, particularly through the people coming out of the Belgian movement, which is Ernest Mandel, coming out of the Greek movement, which is Michel Pablo, and coming out of this particular wing of the French movement, which is Pierre Frank. The Trotskyist movement's radical opposition to the People's Front policy, which was what allowed it to grow in 1936 through to 1938, it grew enormously, and by 1938 had about 10,000 members worldwide, which is trivial on the world scale, but nonetheless it's vastly greater than it had before. But that gets lost. This history of how do you approach the question to People's Front disappears. And then the consequence of that, these guys, various lefties. The underlying principle of the People's Front is not that it's about creating coalitions which, by being coalitions, declare their loyalty to the capitalist state. It's lost. And instead, comrades either capitulate, which is what Ian Birchley has done, or John Mullen has done, or the Nouveau Parti Anticapitaliste, l'Anticapitaliste, the Mandelites have done. Or alternatively, they can't give, as Charlie Kimber, the only explanation they can give is the alternative to the People's Front is street strike, which is not. It's not an alternative to the People's Front. So that I think is the legacy in the Trotskyist movement of its own dishonesty about its history in relation to the opposition to Trotsky around 1935. That's it.